Hello, everyone. My name is Colby Fenster, and I apologize, like I said, in the delay for getting the webinar started. Essentially today, though, we'll be going over reporting in a case management software and doing your own data analytics in Excel. And so essentially the focus of the webinar will be going over not just reports in RiteTrack, even if you're using another software system, kind of reports that you would expect, or how reports are going to function. And then we'll kind of go over some different types and purposes of reports. And then at the very end, we'll look at doing some statistical reports, and I'll be showing everyone how they can essentially take those statistical reports, and granted you're provided the raw data or have access to the raw data, you'll be able to do more things than what the report is providing, or maybe showing and stuff. So with that, a little bit of background information about me before I share my screen and everything. My name is Colby Fenster, and I'm going to be the head of the Handle's Customer Relations Department. I've been with Handle for over 6.5 years now, and currently manage 20+ clients with a variety of departments using RiteTrack. And so I've seen a lot of different ways to do reporting in a lot of different industries and stuff. And that's my favorite part, is working with clients and making sure their system gets them the data they need. So with that, give me one sec. I just got to figure out how to make myself the presenter. Perfect. Okay. Let me swap some things over real quick. Apologize on that. And perfect. Okay. So the first thing I'm going to kind of start with, is reports are great and everything, but your reports are only going to be as good as your data, and your data is only going to be as good as how well your staff enters the data into your system. So just kind of keep that in mind as we're going through different contexts and the type of stuff, because it's oftentimes as a director or a supervisor position, it's easy to add things, or say, oh yes, we need a report that does this and this and this. Well, those reports aren't going to be beneficial unless that data is getting entered, and that data is going to get entered by your staff. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and kind of start, and we're going to focus on reporting context. And that's kind of what is the base of a report, or where is it going to appear from? And what I mean by that is in RiteTrack, or in usually a software system, we have kind of two different types of reports. The first report is going to be a global report, and a global report is going to look at the entire database for information. So in RiteTrack, if you go to your Actions tab and then go to Reports, these are going to be a list of all of your global reports in the system. And again, like I mentioned, they're going to look over the entire database for information. So for example, let's say I wanted to know who has outstanding fines and fees for our probation department, our juvenile detention center, or our court system. I'm going to go to our outstanding probation fines and fees report, and this is going to show me everyone in the system who has an outstanding fine or fee. It's not just one specific person. Again, it's a system-wide overview. The second type of reports then we have are called contextual reports, or object context reports. And these are reports that are going to be found on a specific object or specific record in the system, and it's only going to show information for that specific object or record. So for example, here we'll see we have Joseph West. He's one of our people that has an outstanding fine or fee. I can click on his name, and it's going to take me to his person record, so I can see information, about Joseph West. And you'll see here under his tab, or his tree here, there's a reports option, and you'll see I have a person outstanding probation fines and fees report. And so when I click on that, this report now is only going to show me information for Joseph specifically. There's no one else going to be appearing on this report. It's only going to be showing information for the person I'm viewing. The same type of thing can be found elsewhere in a RiteTrack, or if you're looking at another case management system or other softwares and stuff, make sure they kind of have those reports that are going to get you your overall statistical information and then your object context ones. And so another example of another contextual report is I can go to a case in the system, and let's say I'm going to go to Joseph's probation case now. Now under his probation case, and you'll see here it says person case up at the top now, and I go to reports, I have different reports that I can run. And I can click on like the person case summary report. And this report is only going to show me information about this one specific case for Joseph. You know, even if Joseph has 5 other probation cases open or in the past or anything like that, this specific report is only going to give me information about this one case. And then the third type of report, and this is in our newer product, is going to be what we call a dashboard or a dash tile. And this is going to be a report that is frequently needed and it's important to have easy access to. So those are going to be accessible from your main login screen normally. And so for an example here on my user account, I have what we call our active caseload dash tile visible. So as a director, you know, if I wanted to see what do we have for active cases and everything, this gives me an easy or a quick snapshot. I can go through and see, okay, we have this number of people in this type of case, number of people in this type of case, etc. It gives me an easy way to see all that information without having to go in and manually run the report myself or worry about the system sort of auto-generating the report for me and sending it to me via my email and things like that. So, and you can use other different types of dash tiles and stuff. Normally, these are going to be those global reports, again, because you're going to be looking at system-wide. You're not probably wanting to have a report or a dash tile for one specific individual or anything. You're going to want to know, you know, about everyone in the system. And so we have, so you could essentially also have like a room list report if you're in, you know, a juvenile facility or something like that. You know, instead of having to constantly go to actions and then reports and then run your room list, you could set that up to be a dash tile. And then the dash tile, you know, anytime you go to the home screen or log in, you're going to instantly be able to see who is assigned to what room and get that information. So with that, then we're going to kind of jump into the different types and purposes of reports. And so kind of going back to where I mentioned, you know, reports are great and everything, but your reports are only going to be as good as your data, and then your data is only as good as what's entered. That's kind of where these different types and purposes of reports come into play. So the first report that I'm going to kind of go over is a finding information report. So that's going to be a report that makes it easy to find information about a specific object or a person and gives you the whole picture without a whole lot of digging. And so for my example there, if I go to, let's see, Joseph's record again, let's say I'm an intake officer and I just got a phone call from a police officer that has the youth arrested, and they're wanting to know, you know, is there any alerts about this kid? Is he on probation? Has he been previously convicted? And different things like that. An intake officer could navigate to their record, and then, you know, they could click through the different nodes and see, okay, do they have open person cases? What are their charge history and things like that? Or what you could do is essentially design a report that, and I'm going to show our person probation face sheet, for example, that's going to give me all of his demographic information. And then it's also going to show me more information as well, like alerts. I can see their relationships and what their contact information is. I can see previous arrest history. I can see previous charge history, their case history, etc. So that's one of those great reports that you, that's going to help a specific role or a specific person relay information in certain scenarios and everything. Another example of this would be if there's a report where I want to look and see, you know, notes and everything. If, for example, here on Joseph, he has 4 different probation cases. If I was wanting to look at all my different notes and stuff on all of his cases, I could technically go through each case, open each note, and read that information. Or you could have something like a notes printout or a note search. And this is going to show me all of his notes for all of his cases. And then I could do something like, I want to see any note where I mentioned the word family. And when I type that in, it's now going to only return or display those notes that are going to say, or have the word family and stuff. These type of reports are going to be the reports that probably help your line staff or your intake staff more often, and they're not necessarily focused on getting data or anything like that. And so that's a big thing to kind of keep in mind. These are more of to make processes easier, or I should say relay information that's in the system to someone else in a much faster fashion. The next type of report that you could have is like a template report or a form report. And these are essentially reports that are going to generate a specific form or document for the user, and it's going to have pre-filled information. So these are not going to be your intake forms, because your intake forms, you don't know that information prior. These are going to be things like a letter that needs to be sent out, court notices, notice of hearings, court reports, court orders and stuff, different things like that. Those are the things that are going to be like a template or a form report. And things to kind of think about with those template or form reports, are they frequently changed, or do they need to be easily modified? So for an example, in the past, I've had a client where we built several of their court forms, and as soon as we deployed them to their live and training site, they had their office phone number change and their director changed. And so we had to go through and update the letterhead on every single report to now have this new phone number and new director. Otherwise, the text or the verbiage may stay the same. We've also seen things, with COVID and everything like that. When that first started, a lot of courts were moving from, in-person hearings to virtual hearings. And so notice of hearings had to have their documents or their formatting or their wording changed to include verbiage now about how the hearing is going to be conducted remotely. So those are kind of things to think about when you're doing a template or a form report, because depending on your case management system, they may have to manually change those every time there is a change to them, or they may have something like we do in our new system where you can go in and update those yourself. So for example, and this is an example in our Juvenile our module, if I go to a person and then you'll see I have a reports option, there's one called a text templater. And so for this example, I created a fake youth information sheet. So if I have a youth that comes into the facility and they've been in the facility before, I can have this form pre-populate with their name, their date of birth, their social security number, their male, their gender, their race, their primary language, height, weight, addresses, etc. And then I can also put in spots for them to update this information. Should they have a new address? Should they have a new email? And so that's kind of the different designs or the thoughts behind some of these template reports. The other nice thing is you can go in here and say, let's say I no longer want the primary language to display on this report. I essentially just have to go in, delete this, update or save and exit, and now any time I generate this new youth information sheet, that information is no longer going to display. But let's say now I want to make sure the youth's name is bold. I can go in, edit my template. I'm going to highlight this section here, and I'm going to indicate it's now going to be bold. I can save it, and now the youth's name is going to be bold. And going back to this template one more time, you can kind of see up here, these are the different data points that I can kind of drag and drop into my report for it to pre-populate with. So if there was a case number or people they're related to, I want their contact information in here, I would be able to kind of look through the different fields that are available to me and drag and drop those into the specific place I want those to appear. The other thing I'll mention too is depending on the report generation tool that your case management system may use, most of these probably have the ability to export them as a PDF or a Word document. And so that would be like the save or the print button. Others may give you the ability, like we do, to copy the clipboard to where I can essentially copy this text. And you see it's going to look a little weird on my screen, and that's just because it's trying to auto scale to how big my monitor is. But if I copy this to my clipboard, and I go to an empty Word document, and I paste this, you can see it looks much nicer or much cleaner when it gets into that Word template. And then, I'd be able to print this off, hand it to my youth, and they could go in and fill this out accordingly. This also kind of keeps in mind, though, going back to the staff reports, I've had clients come in and say, I really like these ideas of having these pre-generated templates and forms. And when their staff go to generate them or use them, no information is showing up. And that's just because the staff haven't been shown or trained, or they don't have that connection of where the data that they're entering into the system is going to benefit them. And so things like an address and stuff, that was something I've worked with clients before where their staff just didn't really see the need for them to enter an address for a person. But as soon as they had to generate a court report where they were having to type that information every single time, as soon as I was able to show them that, hey, if you go to your contact information section, you put in their address here, the system's now going to be able to display it. I had that buy-in where, okay, it made sense for me now to take that extra minute to make sure I'm inputting this information. And that's the same thing we've also worked with. So this is an example of a court report. So anytime a youth had a hearing, they essentially, the probation officer was supposed to go in and fill out this entire form. So they were having to type the youth's name, the youth's parents, what charges the youth had for the hearing. And a lot of it was having to just copy and paste from previous documents, or, hope nothing had really changed and things like that. And it was a very tedious thing. And so one of the goals was, can we get this report in RiteTrack? And so, when we first started, it was, okay, well, let's define the data points that you're going to need in the system. And so we were able to identify, yep, we have a place to track the person's name. We can pull their custodian or parents from their relationships. We already have a charges section. So, as long as they're entering the charges into the system, we can populate that. And then we got down into these narrative sections. And that's also can be kind of a catch-22 when you're generating a report or have one of these forms in your system. And that's just because, again, if you want the system to be able to populate that, you need to have a spot for your staff to enter it. And so for this example, they were having to already document in the individual's case file, what are the goals and interests of the youth? What are the recommendations of the probation officer? And different things like that. But they weren't having that connection of that's the exact same, what I'm typing in those notes is the exact same information I need on my court report. And so that's where, again, when we were working with the staff and trying to get that initial buy-in, as soon as we were able to explain, you go into their probation case, you have a note and you have a type of goals or a note type of recommendation, and the system can then populate it. All of a sudden, when it came time to generate their court report, they were just having to verify and make sure they didn't misspell a word or have a typo or something, rather than having to redo everything or create everything by themselves, or creating the reports from scratch. And so, but until you have that buy-in or that connection of why is it important to enter this data into the system, it doesn't help me at all. It was an uphill battle to get staff to consistently enter that information. So that's just something to kind of keep in mind too when you're designing a system and identifying some of these reports. It's great to have statistical reports to help have you, or to populate your grants or answer questions you get from your tribal council or county commissioners and different things like that. But to really make them beneficial and get that buy-in, you also need to probably make sure you have reports that are going to help your staff do their day-to-day work and make some of their jobs or processes easier. And then another type of report that I was going to mention is a data cleanliness report. So kind of speaking of those reports that are those grant funding or those statistical reports, that's where these data cleanliness reports can come into play. And so those are essentially reports that are going to help a user or help a director identify their integrity of the data in their system. And it can be used to check for validations that the system may not have. So for example, in some of our previous systems, we used to put in hard checks that, you couldn't enter a date of birth in the future. You couldn't enter a date of death in the future. You couldn't indicate that somebody was living at an address in the future. Or, so if you were notified that somebody was going to move and all that type of stuff, we used to have validations in place that prevented users from doing things like that. And that can be a catch-22, that does ensure people are entering good data and people aren't fat fingering, a date of birth. They're not trying to type in 2023 and accidentally hit 2033 or something like that. But it's also kind of that fine line of how many validations do I put in place where it's not a hindrance on the users that are actually entering the data. So these data integrity reports are kind of like those warnings where we're still going to let you enter the data or use the data as is. There's just things that we think are missing or don't seem quite right. And so my example kind of in how to relate it to more of a realistic term would be, if you're driving your car and you get a low tire pressure warning, the car's not just going to immediately shut off and prevent you from driving it, right? You can still drive your car even though you have that low tire pressure warning. So for our example, I'm going to look at what we call our missing data reports. And so that's something that we've seen some of our clients struggle with in the past is, when it comes time to enter intake information for a youth or a parent and things like that, there's key pieces of information that we need to make sure every youth has entered on them. And, just with the craziness sometimes of adding a new person into the system or getting a new youth in your system, sometimes the time that when the intake's occurring is different from when the information is actually getting entered into RiteTrack. And that sometimes can lead to things missing. And so for an example here, this report looks at several common data points that we've had clients, always or ask and make sure that, hey, I need my staff to enter this information. So this report will go and look and see, does anyone that has an active probation case, are they missing their social security number? Are they missing their gender? Are they missing their race value? Are they missing their height, weight, etc.? And the nice thing is too, is we've designed a way to filter it by staff. So this can also be a great way to identify staff that may need additional training. And so, if Casey, for example, is constantly missing the social security number on his youth, I can go in and work with him on making sure, he understands where that needs to be entered, how it needs to be entered, and kind of when I expect it to be entered in, this initial, in the data entry process. And you can do other things as well. We've had clients customize these missing data reports to show documents. If there's releases of information or consent forms that need to be scanned and uploaded into your system, and you want to make sure you have those, you could do the same thing. Say, hey, I need to have a tie-in on their admission record, on their case record. Do I have a copy of their birth certificate? And, have it look for those type of things as well. Another thing you can do with these kind of data cleanliness reports is look for duplicates and stuff. That's something we usually run into with our clients that have multiple departments using the system. And so that's just one of those things, we try and put warnings and say, hey, you already have a Samuel Fenster in the system. But if the other person is typing the name as Sam Fenster, and they don't recognize that or realize that, it's an easy way for you to get multiple duplicates in the system, and those just kind of exist, and you have one person entering information on one record and another person entering information on another record, and it's the same person. And so again, because the computer is not going to just be able to know 100% for sure or not, that's where we can do things like a duplication report to help you identify those things. We can also use it for just, like I mentioned, is there anybody with a date of birth in the future? Or, some of those things that the system doesn't have a validation for, but you still like to be aware of or know of for sure. And then the last type of reports that I'm going to go over are the statistical reports. So those, again, pretty kind of are just like the name says, reports that give you statistics. And so for this example, I'm going to look at our arrest statistics report. So this report is designed to give you information about any arrests that have occurred within a certain time frame. So you'll see here up at the top, we have parameters. This tells me my date range. So by default, it's going to look at the previous month before. So if I was looking right now, it's going to look for January 1st, 2023 to January 1st, or 31st, 2023. You'll see here then I have what we call our breakout table, and I'll kind of explain the purpose or importance of this in just a second. This is going to be my raw data. And then if you scroll down, I have pretty charts and graphs that will show me different pieces of information. So I can see an arrest count by race. So I can see, of the 3 arrests we had in January, 2 were Caucasian, 1 was African American. Maybe I want to break it out by gender. All 3 of the arrests in January were gender. I can break out by age, etc. And so you can see here, just with our standard report, this report is quite lengthy and everything, and that's just to kind of give you an idea or some of those quick snapshots of what you're able to see. Well, it's easy to, when you're looking at this type of report, to go, well, what about these statistics? And what about these statistics? And that's where the data breakout comes into play. And that's going to be kind of the second half of this webinar, where I'll show us how you can answer those questions using Excel. The other importance of having these data breakout tables is it will show you how the system is getting its number, right? So if I look at this and go, that's a really low arrest count, I know for a fact we had 5 arrests. This allows me to see the 3 that were counted, and then I could cross compare those to my own internal numbers, or I could go then look and see, oh, somebody accidentally put that arrest in 2033, or they put 2022 as the arrest date, or no, it didn't happen, and different things like that. So that kind of helps you get a better understanding of your data, and it's not just so much as of click and have the computer do the magic, and it just gets everything right all the time. Because again, the only way your data is going to get into the system is through you and your staff. And so it's a great way to make sure that, that data is actually getting entered there. And I also kind of relate it to, in elementary school or in high school math class where your teacher was constantly reminding you to show your work. This is how RiteTrack shows its work. You can quickly look through here and go, okay, well, I want to see this breakout. Then I can look at my table and see, oh, these were the 2 arrests that were Caucasian, and this was the 1 arrest that was African American. And then the other thing to kind of keep in mind too with some of these statistics reports is a lot of times they can show you way more information than you need to see. But again, it's just kind of one of those guessing games of we want to give you a whole bunch of tools to do hopefully a whole bunch of cool things with. So another section of this report, if you're wondering, well, that's great for the arrest information. Well, what's this minimum months and maximum months report? If I scroll to the very bottom, we can also do things like recidivism statistics. So if I wanted to see how many youth were arrested, multiple times within a certain time frame, or within the last 6 months, I can go in here and document that information. So it will show me, Wallace here was initially arrested on January 1st, 2023, and then he got arrested again on January 15th, 2023. So those are, again, just some of those examples of, how you can have different statistic reports to show things, but also just to kind of keep in mind, if you're looking at your reports and stuff in your system, ask about what parameters you have. What do these control? What information do they have? Or what if I change this? Well, how is that going to impact my data and stuff? And then I can also explain like this view sections here. If there's certain parts of this report you only want to focus on, because even as we're looking through this, I have to scroll and scroll and scroll. You can change like visibility sections. So those are things to just kind of keep in mind as you're looking at different statistic reports, is pay attention to the parameters up at the top, because those might let you manipulate the data or change the data in certain ways. And real quick before we go to the Excel route, the last thing I was going to mention too, a lot of times we have some clients that ask, can I just get all of the statistics in this one report? And we used to do that in our old product, and those reports, even for running it for 1 month, would become 50 to 60 pages sometimes, because we're trying to show every possible permutation of what a client could want or what a client thinks they may want. And so just kind of keep that in mind, as there is that gray area or that catch-22 of, you know, having to find, you know, arrest information by age. I still have to kind of scroll down quite a bit to get that information. And so that's where maybe doing my own analysis, or, you know, these, again, visibility parameters can come into play. So with that, that's kind of like, again, just things to keep in mind when you're looking at reports for a case management software. And so there's, you know, you have two different contexts. So I'd always try to keep that in mind. You're going to have your global reports that, again, that look at the entire database for information. Then you're going to have contextual reports that look at a specific object or record, and you're only going to return information for that specific object or record in question. And so now we're going to look at doing the own data analytics in Excel, and I'm going to go back to this arrest statistics report, and I'm going to change our date values here from being 2023, or the first part of 2023. We're going to go back and look at 2020. So I'm going to change this real quick to be 01/2020 and then 12/31/2020. Then let me update my report. And now I have all of 2020's information. So if you're wanting to do your own data analysis or analytics, again, you're going to want to have access to this raw data or a breakout table that shows that raw data. And you're going to need a way to export it into the system. For the RiteTrack, you have the ability to click on this export table button. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. And then I'm going to select Excel, and it's automatically going to create or download an Excel document for me. And you'll see it's going to be called arrest statistics. Before I kind of go into the Excel file, I just want to explain some things to think about when you're doing your raw data, or what all needs to be included. So essentially on the back end in any database, they're going to have what's called a primary key. And that's essentially what the computer or the system uses to determine what record is what. So for example, if you look here, our very first column is going to be a person ID. So whenever you create a new person in the system, they are going to be assigned a unique person ID. So that means no other person in the system can have this person ID. So if we kind of look at my records here, you'll see Samuel Fenster has a person ID of 3. Wallace has a person ID of 1021. Teresa has a person ID of 1022. And if you look through this, no one essentially has the same person ID. And if you're like, well, I see another Teresa record right there, that's because it's the same Teresa here. But if we go look at our arrest information, you know, you'll see there's multiple arrests for her. But the whole reason I'm kind of explaining that is because sometimes you may just be given the name of an individual, and that's kind of a catch-22, because, you know, technically a name is not a unique identifier. You could have somebody with the same first name, middle name, and last name, and if you tried to, you know, do statistics on, you know, the unique number of people and stuff like that you arrested, and you go by name, you know, there's a chance you're missing some data because somebody has the same name. So just kind of keep that in mind, is you'll want to make sure you have access to the unique identifier of whatever your system is using. So you can, you know, tell the computer, I'm not just having to compare Wallace Snell to Wallace Snell, you know, I can compare person 1021 to person 1022. And that's the same thing you're going to see over here. We have this person arrest ID. So again, whenever an arrest gets entered into the system, on the back end, the system is assigning it a unique value as well. So no other arrest record can have this value. And that's going to come in very handy once we open up our Excel document. So just to kind of keep that in mind, again, make sure you have access to some of your unique identifiers so you can do your statistics. So with that, I'm going to open up my downloads real quick, and we're going to open up the arrest statistics Excel document that was downloaded to my computer. And I'm going to enable editing, and this is what it's going to look like. So I have all my raw data in a nice clear Excel format. And now to start the data analytics part, there's two things you have to do to set that up. So the first thing you're going to do is select all of your data, including the column headers. So that's the bold parts up here. So it tells me what that column is supposed to represent. So I'm going to make sure I have all of mine selected. So I'm going to scroll down, and it looks like I just have 37 records. And then what I'm going to do is when you have Excel open, you'll see there's an option at the top to format as a table. So I'm going to click on that, and you'll get a variety of different colors you can pick from. For this example, I'm going to do the blue style. And then you'll see it's going to ask me, does my table have headers? And yes, it does, because that's the first row that I selected. So I'm going to go ahead and click OK. And now what Excel is going to do is you'll see it put filters next to every single one of these columns. So this right here would allow me to do things like, okay, let's say I want to look at my raw data by arrest date and time. I can change that. Maybe I want to look at all the people that were arrested that were males. I can go ahead and uncheck these other options, and do that and identify that information. But that kind of still requires a lot of counting, if you're wanting to do some of that filtering and things like that yourself. So that's where then this next step is going to come into play. And this time you're going to just highlight just your data, not the column headers. So I'm going to start with my first person ID in my data. And sorry, I got to move my headset. And then make sure I have all my other data or the raw data selected. Once I have it selected, you'll see right above the column A, there's a section here, and it's probably going to say something like table 1, or if you've created multiple tables before, it might say table 2 or 3. And I'm essentially just going to click in here to where table 1 is highlighted, and I'm going to call it arrests. So this is just because we're looking at arrest statistics. If you were looking at charge statistics or case statistics, you'd want to give it a more appropriate name. But for this example, we're looking at arrests, so I'm going to do arrests, sorry. And then I'm going to hit enter. So once I hit enter, and just to kind of double check that you're all caught up to speed, you'll now see that there's a drop-down value where it was saying table 1. And in that drop-down, you should see table 1 as an option, and then arrests as an option. So again, real quick, before we kind of move on to the next steps, just as a reminder, the very first thing you're going to do is highlight all of your data with your column headers, go into on the home page or the home section of Excel, do format as table. And then the second thing you'll do is go in and highlight just your raw data, and then go in here and get in the name box, change it to something that makes sense and hit enter. Once you've completed that, you should see whatever you named it in the same drop-down where you see something like table 1. Sometimes when you export things to Excel, formatting and things like that, it may introduce some duplicate columns or some weird columns and stuff. So if you did export information and there was like a column 1 with nothing in it randomly between, like race and gender, you could go ahead and just delete those. But now that we have that all set up, now we get to start doing some of the fun stuff, which is with what's called a pivot table. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to create a new sheet in my Excel document. And when I go, and then at the very top of Excel, I'm going to go to the Insert tab. And on the Insert tab, you'll see that actually the very first thing listed here is a pivot table, because lots of different industries and people use them. And so I'm going to go ahead and click on that. And then it's going to ask me to select a table or range, and I'm going to enter the name of whatever I named that previous part. So I called mine arrest, so that's what I'm going to define as my table or my range. If you called it, arrest statistics, you'll want to make sure you type in arrest statistics. And then the next thing you're going to want to do is go to this bottom section here where it says choose whether you want to analyze multiple tables, add this data to your data model. You're going to want to make sure that is set to true, and then you're going to click OK. Once you do that, you'll see now I have my pivot table right here. And then on the right-hand side, I have all of those different columns for my Excel sheet. And so real quick, I got to just move my GoToWebinar out of the way. And so now I can essentially go in here and say, okay, well, let's start looking at some numbers. So the numbers are going to be your values section here. And this is where, let's say I want to know how many people were arrested in 2022. That's going to be people, not my number of arrests, my number of people. So I'm going to drag that down to the values section. And you'll see the very first thing it does is say it's the sum of the person IDs. So what that is doing, and you don't need to follow along with this, but I'll just show you where it's coming from, is it's essentially taking the sum of every single one of these person IDs in my data set. And so we need to change that. So what you're going to do is where it says values, if you right click on where it says sum of person ID, or you might have to click on it, you'll see the very last option in this menu that pops up is a value field settings option. So you're going to click on that, and then you're going to scroll all the way down to the bottom, and you see there's going to be an option for distinct count. And that's what you're going to select instead. And so it will automatically update the custom name for you. And then when I click OK, it's now going to show me, okay, you had 29 unique people arrested in this time frame. Well, how many arrests in total did I have? That's then you just repeat that exact same process, and I'm going to drag my person arrest ID into this value section. And again, it's going to do the same thing and just sum those values initially. And so again, you don't have to follow along here, but essentially what it's doing is it's taking all of these person arrest IDs and summing them together. I'm going to want to change that as well now, again, by clicking on value field settings, scrolling down to the bottom and doing a distinct count. So once I do that, I can now look at my pivot table, and it's going to show me we had 29 unique people arrested in 2022, and overall we had 35 arrests. So that tells me a couple of people got arrested multiple times. Now what I can do is use my other columns here to group that information or break that information out. So let's say I want to look at gender. I can now drag gender, for example, to my rows section. And what that is now going to do is it's going to create a line and show me, okay, looks like we had 10 females arrested, 18 males, and 1 person with a gender of unknown. Then I can see we had total 13 female arrests, a total of 20 male arrests, and 2 arrests related to the 1 person that has a gender of unknown. And if you're wondering, like, well, how come unknown gets entered into there? That kind of goes back to those whole data cleanliness reports I was talking about, or those missing data reports. So if I go look at my raw data over here, you'll see here Susan Lamb is my guilty party that has an unknown value for their gender. So if I see that while I'm doing my statistics, I would probably want to go in and fix that data into RiteTrack and then regenerate these reports. Otherwise, if I fix it here, it's not going to magically fix itself in RiteTrack. And honestly, real quick too, you should be able to identify that information before you export it to Excel. So if I'm looking at my 2022 data, I can type, like, in the search option over here, unknown. And that's going to go in and filter to those that have a record of unknown. I can also look, and if I look at my breakout of different races and gender and things like that, you'll see I have unknown values here as well. And it looks like I may have changed my date values, which is why we're seeing more or new records and stuff. So just kind of keep that in mind when you're looking at your information and stuff. So with that, let me go minimize this, and we're going to go back to our Excel sheet with our pivot table. And so let's say I just wanted to create a bar graph then and show this information. What I'm going to do is highlight the data that I want in that graph. So for this example, I'm going to just do a distinct count and the distinct count of a person. And then I'm going to go back over to the insert section, and you'll see that there's a charts option at the very top. When I click on recommended charts, I'm going to use looks like it's called a column chart, or a bar chart or whatnot, and I'm going to go ahead and click OK. So now that's going to show me or generate a graph for me now that shows that information. So I can look over here and see in my legend, the blue column is going to be representing the distinct count of the person IDs, and the orange column is going to do my actual number of arrests. And then from here, you would have the ability, to add your labels and stuff. So if you right-click on your data, you can see here, I can go to add data labels and select that. And now it's going to put the number above the chart and everything. I can do the same thing with the blue ones. And I could then add, a chart header, change the formatting, change the sizing, all that type of stuff. And I'm now able to show that information in a quick and easy format that's, and it's very readable. So that's just kind of example one of what you can do with a pivot table. We're now going to do another example, and this time you're just going to create another new sheet in your Excel document. And so, and then I'm going to repeat those exact same steps of going to insert and then pivot table. And again, I'm going to type in arrests because that's what I named my data. I'm going to make sure I have add this data to the data model correct or clicked and marked true, and then hit OK. Now you'll see I have pivot table number 2, and this time we're going to look at, let's say, arrest statistics by their arresting agency. So what I'm going to do again is drag my person arrest ID down to my value section. And again, I'm going to need to change the sum value to the count distinct. And again, you'll just click on it, value field settings, and then distinct count. And then let's say I now want to look at my arresting agencies. So I'm going to grab my arresting agency and we're going to drag that to my rows. So this is now going to give me a breakout of my number of arrests per each agency in the entire year. And if I wanted to do something now like a scatter plot chart or a scatter line, I'm going to highlight my distinct data again. I'm going to go back to the insert section of Excel. I'm going to go to recommended charts. And this time I'm going to do a line chart. So we're going to look at this first option right here. And I'm going to go ahead and click OK. Oh, and so you'll see right now that my chart is formatted a little weird and it's not maybe doing what I'm expecting it. So that's where you may sometimes just have to play around with what you have defined as your rows versus your columns. And so this is just showing a line of, the different agencies. What I'm probably wanting to show you instead is I'm going to drag my arresting agency field to the legend over here and and then let me delete my graph, and now let me select this data. Oh, sorry, without the total. Okay, now if I go to insert and do a chart, and I do my line chart again, you'll see here you can kind of summarize it, or when you preview it, it's going to have a line for each of those arresting agencies. And I'm going to be able to go in and, let me double check real quick. Sorry. Give me one sec. Okay, sorry, I'm going to add one more thing real quick, and my apologies. I walked through this once and I realized I forgot to do one thing. So before we do the arresting agency now, we're going to go do one thing real quick, and let's say I want a year breakout. So I want to see the arresting agency breakout over the entire year. So we're going to go back to our sheet 1 now, where our raw data is. And you'll see here we have the arrest date and time. But let's say I want to break them out now by the month of an arrest. What you can do is if I insert a new column into my table, so I'm just going to click up here where it has column H and do insert. You'll see it inserted a new column, and we're going to call this arrest month. Then what I'm going to do is Excel has numerous built-in functions that allow you to take the data that you have and do things with it. So, and especially with dates and stuff. So if I type in a equal sign, that's going to be your signal to Excel that you're wanting to use a function. And then I'm going to type in month, and you'll see that there's an option right there. So I'm going to go ahead and click that. And then you're going to want to put whatever you want the month of in these parentheses. And so for this example, I want my arrest date to become my arrest month. So I'm just going to click on my arrest date time field. And what you'll see now is instead of actually putting the 10/6/2020 here, it said, okay, we want the arrest date time field to go in here. And so as soon as I click away, oh, sorry, let me do that again. and hit enter, it's now going to take that property and apply it to every other record in my system. So you'll see here it gave the first row arrest month of 10, an arrest month of 3, an arrest month of 1, etc. So now what you're going to want to do is we'll go back to our sheet 3, and I'm going to delete my graph again because I don't know if it will update just magically. And I'm going to click back on my pivot table. And if we look at our section here where we have our fields, you'll see arrest month isn't one listed. You just have to tell the system you need to refresh it. So if you right click anywhere on your pivot table, you'll see there's an option to do a refresh, and I will go ahead and select that. And now if we look in my pivot table fields, guess what? There's an arrest month now. So what I'm going to do is drag that down to my rows, and now I'm able to see a breakout of what each department did by month. Just so you're aware too, if you're looking at this, so some of these, like Casper Police Department, it didn't have any arrests in January. If you'd like it to display a 0 instead, you can also right click on your pivot table, and then you'll see there's an option for pivot table options. When you click on that, on the very first thing you're brought up with, you'll see there's an option for empty cells show blank. You can just type in 0 here, and it will then put a 0 for wherever there's a blank value. So now what I'm going to do is do my chart real quick. So let me go in here. Now we'll select the data. You're not going to select the grand total or anything, just the data for each department and stuff. I'm going to go back to insert, we'll do charts, and then I'm going to do that line chart again. And I'm going to go ahead and click OK. So what that just did now is it's going to go through and create a line chart for me that allows me to see a breakout of what each agency did each month in terms of number of arrests for the entire calendar year. So we can look here and, I don't know how many people are familiar with Wyoming, where Handel's based, but we're based out of Laramie, and then Casper's a city about 2.5 hours away. Cheyenne's a city about 45 minutes away, and then the Rock Springs is another city that's a couple of hours away. So, maybe they're traveling for family or a state basketball or a sporting event or something like that. And so that's why, I'm seeing these arrests, is because the kid is from Laramie, but was getting arrested in a different city. So kind of looking at this, I can see at the start of the year, we had a pretty big, normal uptick of Laramie always seems to happen or have a couple of arrests throughout the year. It's very rare that they don't have an arrest. It's always around that, 2 to 3 mark and everything. And then I can also see right here, Cheyenne Police Department had a huge spike in arrests in July and August. Well, if you've heard of what's called Cheyenne Frontier Days, or the daddy of them all, it's a giant rodeo with concerts and food and drinking, et cetera. And tons of people flocked to Cheyenne, Wyoming for the last week and a half of July, first week of August. And a lot of trouble can sometimes happen at these things. So, I would be able to kind of look at that and go, that makes sense. It would make sense why Cheyenne has a higher arrest rate for youth or individuals, because that's where everyone is going. I've had a client, they looked at this for their cities and their county and stuff, and one of the counties looked like it didn't have a whole lot of arrests, but that's where most of the people lived. And we were looking at the data, and then it finally clicked to him, well, the other city has the mall, and the mall is where all the teenagers hang out. So it kind of made sense then why this specific city was having more arrests compared to, its population density and population breakout of the county, is because it had the spots to hang out. You can also do things with these pivot tables. So let's say I don't want to look at all of these different arresting agencies. You can actually go in here and I can modify this on the fly and say, I only want to focus on Cheyenne and Laramie. I don't really care about Casper Police or Wyoming Highway Patrol. I'm going to go ahead and click OK, and you'll see now it's going to hide the rest of those for me, and I can, again, see that information a little bit more clearly. And then we're going to create one more pivot table just to give you guys some more ideas on what you can do. And again, a lot of this may just depend on playing around with it and manipulating your pivot tables to see what you can have it display and everything. But I'm going to create another sheet again, and we're going to do that exact same step one more time of going to Insert, Pivot Table, I'm going to type in my arrests here, and then I want to make sure again that I have add this data to the data model, and I'm going to click OK. Now what I'm going to do is, let's say I want to focus on arresting agencies by community or their location and stuff. So again, I'm going to drag my person arrest ID down here to the values. I'm going to again change it from being a sum to a distinct count. And this time, let's say I want to do an arrest location again, like I said, by the month. So let me grab my arrest location. I'm going to make that a column. And so you'll see here, we have an arrest location field. So I could see, you know, we had 22 people arrested in the community, 4 at home, 9 at school. And I want to again compare that to a year or month over month average. So I'm going to drag my arresting month down to my row section here. So this is going to look at all of my different arrests. Well, let's say I only want to look at just Laramie Police Department. You have a couple of different options. I could drag, you know, a Laramie Police Department or the arresting agency value to one of my rows or one of my columns, and it would then group things accordingly. And then you'll see here there's filters, or I can change things on how I want it to work. Or what I can do is actually just drag my arresting agency as a filter. And so you'll see now my pivot table at the very top is going to show arresting agency, and then it's going to have all selected. If I expand that dropdown, you'll see when I click on it, it's going to default to all. And if I was wanting to look at just one specific area, I would just want to click the 1. Otherwise, if I wanted to like look at 2 of the 3 or 2 of the 5 or 3 of the 5, you'll want to make sure you have this select multiple items checked. But for this one, we're just going to look at Laramie Police Department. So I'm going to click OK then, and it's now going to filter my data to only show Laramie police arrests that were tied to the Laramie Police Department. And again, I'm going to go through and update this just so it shows zeros in those empty cells, just because I think it looks a little nicer. And then again, I could do something like a bar chart, or when I highlight my data now, let's say I'm going to do another line charts. Those are my favorite. But again, you can play around with the different types of charts and everything. But I'm going to look at a line chart again. And so for this example, it's now going to show me for the Laramie arrests, where did they happen, you know? And for this example, we just did community, home, and school. So if you can see here, it looks like for the start of the year, we had several. That's going to be this gray line at school. And then we had nothing all the way till August, you know, December, November, etc. And then you can see in home, we kind of had a couple, but nothing crazy. And then community arrests, those seem to be way more consistent, or we had an uptick in those essentially during these months. Well, if you think about it again, if this is 2020 data, March is when things started to shut down. And so that would be kind of an explanation again of that makes sense of, wow, that's why I had such a normal uptick of school arrests, and then I didn't have any for several months. This could also be tied to summer vacation and stuff. You know, if it's August or, you know, July 1st and you're looking at your arrest statistics and you have 15 school arrests, either the kids at summer school, I guess, maybe aren't behaving, or somebody's selecting the wrong value, or things like that. And then, you know, as things may have reopened in your area, you know, starting that fall, you know, some school districts were virtual, some school districts had person, some school districts had hybrid options. That's where you could kind of analyze and go, you know, that's why we do have a lower decrease in school arrests, is because kids are at home or not in school. And then same thing, you could justify that of why you have an uptick in community arrests or an uptick in home arrests, is because kids are not at school. They don't have that parental supervision, or, you know, they're going, you know, the parents leaving for work and the kids then leaving to go do things in town or hang out with their friends. And so you can kind of generalize those trends, or again, see if your data kind of matches your theories, or look at it to do different things and stuff. And so that's kind of some of the cool things you can do with pivot tables in Excel. And so again, just kind of as a quick recap, as I know we're over our 1 hour time slot, I just want to remind everyone again, once you get your raw data, you'll just export it to Excel. You'll want to make sure you have some sort of unique identifier that you can use. If you only had somebody's name or something like that, just know that you may be missing a couple of people in the off chance that somebody does have the exact same name as another individual. And then, you know, essentially again, the steps, highlight all of your data with the columns, make sure you do the format as table, then highlight just your raw data and give it a name up here in this name box field. And then you'll be able to go in and create your different pivot tables and manipulate your data in different ways. And so theoretically, you could, I can drag and drop and create all those same pivot tables from this exact screen here, but just for kind of keeping things in sync and modifying things and things like that, I kind of like to create a different sheet for each pivot table that I'm looking at. But you can kind of just drag and drop and kind of play around with the information that you're given to create different charts or different trends and analyze that data in a different way. So with that, I appreciate everyone for tuning in today, and I hope it was very beneficial in seeing more again of what you can do for reporting with a case management system, as well as as doing your own data analytics in Excel, given the chance you have that raw data. If you have any more questions or anything like that, feel free to reach out to your project manager or just handle IT in general. Our work office is going to be 307-742-5555. You can also visit our website, and that should be able to point you in the direction to get a hold of us as well. And with that, I hope everyone has a great rest of their Thursday.